Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Brown People Problems, a podcast where we chat about experiences of Brown folks from all around the world, just on what it means and what it looks like to navigate life while being Brown. Today with me, I have Urmi Hossain, who is a Bengali woman by blood and Italian by birth. She's currently living in Canada and works in the financial services industry. She's self-published author, speaker, blogger, polyglot, and a mentor. She wears a ton of different hats. She's also the holder of the CFA charter, and there's more. She has a first book that she recently published, which is called Discovering Your Identity, A Rebirth from Interracial Struggle. You already know this is going to be a good conversation because she really advocates for women's empowerment and is very passionate about teaching and mentoring other girls and women. And she's also part of this organization called Women in Leadership for the Victoria chapter in Canada, where she spreads the message of gender equality and more women in leadership positions. Welcome to Brown People Problems, Urmi. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. It's so lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You're joining us from Montreal, right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, welcome. I'm so looking forward to us chatting a little bit about, just what your experience has been like growing up. I'm really hoping you can tell us a little bit more about your book as well. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about yourself and your journey, Urmi.
Yes, I feel like you already gave us a very warm introduction about myself. So everything you said, it's all about me. And yes, my journey has been more a journey of a third culture kid because I was born and raised in Italy, and my parents are from Bangladesh. And never I was aware of this concept of being a third culture kid, to be honest. I think I was having a conversation with another girl who is a Bengali American. She's basically Bengali by blood and American by birth. And I remember she was telling me, yeah, we are third culture kids. And I was like looking up into Google to find out what it is about. And I realized that I actually identified myself a lot with this because we don't grow up with one culture. We don't grow up with two cultures, but we have a third culture, which is what we embrace to be. And so my experience has been that because all my life I lived in Italy. I grew up in Italy and I was very much surrounded by a lot of Italian people. I did not have brown friends at all, not even one, because I was according to my dad, I was like the first Bengali girl to be born in Italy. And so I did not have any brown friends. All the people, all the Bengali people that I knew were much younger than me because these were like the generations after and so forth. So for me, it was a lot of a struggle because I felt like I was not belonging anywhere. I did not feel Bengali. I did not feel completely Italian because I was very, very much aware of how I look like. And I didn't feel I was Bengali enough either because I was so much surrounded by Italian people that every time I was surrounded by brown people, I felt a little bit like an outsider because I felt like my mentality was not really the same as the mentality of brown people. So that has been a bit of a struggle in really finding my identity. And then I just had this, I would say, thoughts in my mind that I was like, okay, I just want to write it down somewhere. So that's how the book came. And that's where I talk about my life in Italy, and I make a contrast between being a brown person versus non-brown person. I make a comparison between the Bengali culture and also the Italian culture.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Where in Italy is home?
That's a good question. Because I was born in Sicily, Palermo. And so I lived in Sicily for 9 years, and then we moved to the north. So I was in Milan.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. So even within Italy, there's been a lot of movement for you.
Yes, we moved a lot within Italy. I'm summarizing and saying we went from Sicily to Milan, but we went to other places before reaching Milan.
Yeah, certainly. And for those who are listening who maybe aren't familiar with this term, third culture kid, sort of like how Urmi said, this is a term that's best used to describe folks who were raised in a specific culture that is different than their parents' culture or the culture of the country of their ethnicity, right? And then they also live in a different environment during a significant part of their lives and of their developmental years. And it really certainly does apply to you, right? So it's a mishmash of so many cultures. You've got the Bengali culture, the Italian culture, and now Canadian culture as well.
Actually, funny, before we jump into this, like I also have a little bit of the English British
Oh yeah.
influence too, because at before we moved to Milan, when I was I think 13, we lived for a year in UK. And that was my very first approach with brown community, because UK has such a big community of brown people. That was my first time having actually Bengali friends, hanging out with a few Bengali people, going to school where we had Bengali people, because in Italy there was not that many Bengalis, and not at school I was the only one. I was the only person from like who had Bengali origins. And I remember when I went first to UK, I kind of liked that sense of belonging, because I was like, oh, I can see people like looking like me, dressing like me. I could relate in a way with them. So that was my first ever experience with like brown community, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. That's so interesting. And that's also why you mentioned that you're a polyglot. How many languages can you speak out of curiosity?
I I speak 4.5.
Yeah.
I'm working, the five is the Spanish, which I'm trying to like practice, and I'm hoping that it becomes like five. But yeah, I learned Bengali at home, was the mother tongue, and then I always say Italian is my adoptive mother tongue, because I started to use it after going to school. It's been the language I spoke the most with my sister and with my cousin. And then there's English, and then there's French, and these are some of the languages that we had to learn in school back in Italy.
Yeah, even French?
Yes, yes, because I was living in Milan, so it was like it
Why?
was it was closer to France and stuff like that, so we had to learn it. Yes.
It's northern part of Italy. Yeah, that's really interesting. I had no idea that was true. So yeah, wow, certainly you can speak a lot of languages. Do you find it like difficult to switch between the different languages?
Um, a little bit,
Yeah.
because I work right now in a French environment.
Mm.
And so I'm always switching languages, because with the people I work with, I speak a bit of English, but most of my work is in French. But there are some Italian people at the workplace. So I'm always switching around the languages. So that's where sometimes I'm like, I have to think a little bit. And then Italian and French are so similar. So I'm jumping around, sometimes mixing the words. But I would say it was more difficult for me when I had to learn Spanish. That's when I was struggling, because I'm writing essays and I would always start writing in French at some point. I was like, oh, it's not making sense.
Oh man. So you can read and write four and a half languages.
It's not Bengali. I cannot read it and write it.
Yeah. Still though, you're killing it. That's a
It's
lot of
it's just a spoken one. It's the one that we learn at home
yeah.
to communicate with our parents or family. Yeah.
Yeah, and probably like in movies and TV and things like
There
that.
you go. There you go. Yes. Yes.
Gosh, what you're talking about is such a typical experience, right? For a third culture kid. Like you know multiple languages, right? You're familiar with many different cultural environments, and a lot of your childhood or young adult life looks like a lot of movement
It was. Yes.
all around like the globe, as opposed to someone who's, born, brought up, and stayed in the same spot.
Yes, that's why I like to say now that I'm like a global citizen, because I just kept moving around, like even within Italy, then moving countries. Like I always kept having around, and I was not aware of it. Like I never made such a like reflection about it, but I did move a lot during my childhood. It's been very like you know, chaotic in a way and hectic, because I kept moving, changing cities, changing places. So I feel like every single thing just influenced me. And so now when I think about it retrospectively, I feel like it was actually probably a good thing, because I feel like now it just gave me a way to like be a bit more open and have a different perspective on things. So that's something that I feel like it's good in a way, because you just don't see one world, you just see many worlds.
Absolutely. I imagine that probably makes you like a really well-rounded person, and it teaches you a certain type of like adaptability, right?
Mhm.
Like flexibility, like you're more of a flexible person. You can adapt really well to new environments. And certainly sounds like you can look back now and say, yeah, you know what, this has helped me a lot. But I am curious, Urmi, what was it like for you being a kid and having to move around so much?
You know what? The only thing that I always felt sad about was the fact that I was changing school multiple times. Because I
Mm,
think I changed school in my childhood probably 4 or 5 times while living in Italy because we were always changing cities. And that was probably one of the things that I always felt upset for. Like, not upset, but I was always sad about it because I was like making friendship, then we had to change cities. So then I had to leave back all this friendship that I made. With some people, I am still in contact thanks to social media and stuff like that. With other people, I just lost connection. And so that was the only thing that we were just jumping around from one place to another that I was always finding hard to like pick up new relationship and leave back the older relationship. So that was probably the most difficult thing I would say.
mhm. Yeah, because it sounds like you were constantly in motion, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and you just kind of have to adapt as you go, and that requires saying goodbye to some relationships and pushing yourself to form new ones in a new space. But that can be tough, and I often hear that as being, this like key difficulty that so many third culture kids experience is,
Hmm.
hey, I wasn't really able to put my roots down somewhere.
Yeah. In a way, when I look back, like I see a lot of my high school friends that I'm in touch with, they stayed in one place since they were born. It's the same house, same city, same
Mhm.
country. Okay. Me, it's not. I just kept changing. And in a way, I feel like they have a place they can call home because you know what, they've been there forever. But I don't actually have a place that I call home because now my parents they moved to UK. So I don't consider UK home.
Mhm.
Canada, I would say it's more like my second home, but I cannot totally associate to it.
Mhm.
But if you ask me what I consider my home, I would tell you it's Italy.
Yeah.
And it just comes to me natural for me to say that. But I just don't have a physical place that I can say, okay, this is my home because there is none. I did not stay in the same house since I was born. We just kept changing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I probably imagine it's more the culture and the people that feel like home when you think of Italy.
Exactly. And that's exactly how I feel. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's maybe you may not have a home, a house, physical house to return to, right? But often as third culture kids, a lot of us can carry this feeling of home with us. And
Hmm.
often, the feeling of home perhaps even has to be anchored to ourselves because we've moved around so much, and home is where we are in a sense. But because you grew up in the Italian culture, it really seems like, and it makes sense that you have such a fondness for it.
Yes, and because I was there this summer for vacation in Italy, I went to visit a few cities and I was having a croissant in Rome, and just the taste of it, it just brought back a lot of memories of my high school time. So it was making me very nostalgic, like really nostalgic, thinking back of this. And then I came back and I was sharing with some of my high school friends, and I was telling them that, I felt very nostalgic about Italy, like just smelling the coffee, tasting the food. It just brought back a lot of my high school memories. So I do feel very nostalgic time to time.
Yeah, I bet. I bet it's the whole experience of it. Right.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and for those listening, if there's any third culture kids here, it would be really interesting to see what their experience is like as well as they listen to you. Any type of like movement or immigration is difficult, right? Like in the best of circumstances, and any type of sociocultural adjustment is difficult in the best of circumstances. Um, and I'm curious, what I have never been to Italy. And I'm not super familiar with the Italian culture, but looking back, what do you think were similarities between maybe, the Bengali culture at home and then the Italian culture outside? And what were the differences? Because we hear a ton of stories around, the clash between the South Asian and the Canadian or the American cultures. But I am curious to hear about if there was any clash there.
So I would share the similarities, and I think both the South Asian culture and the Italian culture, they share the same values when it comes to like family and spending time with families, and having gathering and having parties and going like a brown weddings is
Yeah.
go big or go home. That's the same thing in the Italian culture.
Right.
Like they do have big weddings, and they do care about being together with family, spending time with family. That's one thing that I felt like it's very, very similar. The love that we have for our food, definitely for the South Asian culture. If you go to a brown person's house, they feed you like there's no tomorrow, and it's the same thing for the Italian culture. They feed you like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
So those were some of the things I felt like it was similar. Also, the role of a woman. I feel like
Mm.
yeah, I feel like it's like, yes, Italy is very like progressive, but back in the days, like women still had that specific role of being like a housewife. You just take care of like home and that's it. And even in like this like South Asian cultures like that,
Mm.
and it was always like that. It's still like that, and I can see that in Italy it was like that too.
Mm.
And some like older generations, it was like that. And so as much as we think, like you know we feel like it's just the South Asian culture being this way, where women are seen a certain way, it actually applies to other culture, and I've seen it in the Italian culture as well. And so these were some of the similarities. And in terms of like clashes, well, there are like a couple of them, because I feel like it is very like open-minded, so it's very accepting to things, like marriages between different religions. It maybe back in the days it wasn't so okay, but now it's like, yeah, you want to get married like with someone from another culture, different religion, it's fine. Like no one actually cares about it. Whereas I feel like for South Asian, it's a little bit more difficult. It's a hurdle that you have to go through so much.
Oh yeah.
That's such a big hurdle, I would say, as a brown person. So that's one of the things I noticed. Um, the other things I also talk about in the book was the dating aspect, because I saw all of my high school friends dating, and they were so open about it. They would bring their boyfriend at home during Sunday for lunchtime, whereas for us it's like forbidden. Forget it. Like you can just dream about it. Literally, you can dream about, like, mention that you have like a guy as a friend, that's it. The next thing is that is that they're like, you're out of your home and stuff like that. But in the Italian culture, it's really not like that. It's like much more accepting, I would say.
Mm.
Um, what else? Other things that happened to me when I was a kid, I remember that my all of my high school friends, and this is something they could never relate to me. They could never relate to me because they would like hang out after school. They would go for a movie. They would get together and do homework together, and I could not do it. I was forbidden to
Mm.
do any of these things, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. But it was the perception behind that
Mm.
just made everyone worry that, oh, what would people say if they like, see you on the street? Like, you're not supposed to be doing all this. You're not supposed to be having so much freedom. And this is something that none of my Italian friends could ever relate. Like, they were like, we just don't understand why. Like,
Mm.
why can you not? And I was like, I wish I had an explanation, but I don't. I actually
Mm.
did not have a proper explanation, but they were very accepting about it. They were like, you know what, we will adjust to it and we'll see how we can make it work.
Mm.
So it was hard. It was hard for them to understand where I was coming from. It was very hard. So that was probably one of the, I would say, biggest clash, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, because it's very much, you go to school and then you come straight home and there's no pit stops in between.
No,
So I imagine.
exactly. So for them, it was hard to get this, or they would like, meet each other on a Saturday, but I couldn't. They would come home late, but I couldn't. If I did, I had a curfew, which was 7 p.m. before dinner, so it's like, okay, how much can I even do? So these were some of the difficult things, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So very similar to the North American cultures, right? The clash, right? But it's curious, a lot of the similarities too, right? Like you were mentioning, and I think as you were chatting, I remember I was speaking to an Italian acquaintance, and they were saying how it's actually very common, um, at least within their family. We're not going to generalize the whole Italian culture, but it's very common for some Italian folks to, after marriage, live with their in-laws as well. But
Yes.
yeah, so maybe like they will live in the basement. Maybe they'll have some separation of space, not like us where everyone is all up in each other's space at all times. But is that
Yes.
something that you found to be true?
Yes, it is true. It is totally true. It's
Oh,
it's so true. It's still true and I think it happens even in North America, because I also have some Italian coworkers where basically the daughter lives in the first floor with her husband, and the second daughter lives on the second floor, and then the in-laws live like on the last floor, and it happens like that even in Italy. So it's like we're not living all under the same roof, but we're living under like in the same building. So it does happen.
oh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
That's curious. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that's very similar to like South Asian cultures, right? But at least there's a little bit of space and of separation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And that's, like often the difficulty navigating couple like two different cultures that are so different from one another. Growing up in two different cultures is such like a tug of war because you have one foot in home and one foot outside of home, and that makes it really tough to stay grounded because you're being pulled in like two different directions all the time.
Yes, and that's literally how I felt about it, because basically every time, let's say I would go to school and I would see the people around me, I was very self-conscious, like super self-conscious about it. I was like, I don't look like any of these people.
Yeah.
None of it. None of them has like dark hair like me. None of them have like dark eyes like me. They don't have like darker skin tone. That was something that I was always so conscious about it. But then the moment I would start speaking in Italian, that's when I was like, okay, but I feel very much myself around them.
Mm.
I feel very much same around them. And then when I would go back home, there was another clash there, because I was like, yeah, I look like everyone else around me. But the moment I start opening my mouth and I share things, people were not okay with the things I was sharing, because I was just I was very like Western in a way. I was like, my mentality was very like Westernized. And
Mm.
so people were not always agreeing with the things I was saying, because I was way too open-minded for them.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so that's what I was like, I don't know where exactly to put myself. That was my struggle. Like, in what box am I fitting? And I never felt like I was fitting anywhere. That's how I felt.
For sure, that creates so much confusion, right? And you were raised in Italy, was it the 90s or the early 2000s?
90s. I wish it was a 2000.
I'm also a 90s kid. Yeah, so gosh, like 90s was a totally different time. And
Things are different now.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was raised in India in the 90s, and then the 2000s, my family moved to Canada. And even when we moved to Canada, there was so much racial diversity here. So it never necessarily felt like I was the only one. So I know I speak to like a lot of folks, and I have a lot of people in my life who were raised in like small towns or like small town America, and they were, one of three brown kids in their school, and they've certainly had those experiences. I think we were certainly more lucky in Canada to have a little bit more diversity, but all that to say that even though I had a lot of diversity and a lot of people that looked like me and sounded like me, I still felt really disoriented, right? Because there's a new culture and a new space that you have to navigate.
So I had a similar experience when I was in UK, because I was like, oh, I find it there are people that look like me. But even though there are people that look like me who were born and raised in UK, and you're thinking, okay, they must have the same mentality as me,
Mm.
I still had a little bit of struggle being associating and hanging out with them,
Yeah.
because I was like, and my mentality is completely different. I just still cannot completely feel like I belong to this group. As much as I enjoy, because that was the thing. My parents suddenly became super open-minded when I had Bengali friends. They were like, oh yeah, 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 go out, hang out, and blah blah blah. Um, and then when I moved to Canada, that's what I was like. I feel like I can just be myself because I feel like there was a lot of diversity. There's a lot of diversity, so I could like, assimilate myself, integrate myself much easier without standing out. But then I started to notice some differences between Bengali girls growing up in Italy versus Bengali girls growing up in UK versus Bengali girls growing up in Canada. Like I saw the difference. I do see it's remarkable, the difference. I feel like it's just in the mentality, in the way you dress, in the way you approach, in the way people perceive it. Like I feel like at least in Canada it's a bit more, some things are normalized. I feel like, it's like, yeah, you want to hang out with your friends, come home late, it's fine. Whereas I feel like in Italy and UK, it's a little bit more, there are rules, I would say, because of this perception that people will see you, will talk about you. Whereas in Canada, I feel like it's a bit more normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much variability everywhere, right? Like even there's more that intergroup like variability.
Mm-hmm.
That everyone's experience is different. My experience as a brown girl is very different than yours, and it's very different than the third person's, right? That
Yes,
just goes to show how much variability there is.
exactly. Like you think every brown girl is the same, but it's not. There's so much differences, and I think it's like I get, like me and you were so different for sure for each other, even though we're both brown, we went through the same thing. But I have that Italian aspect and you have that Canadian aspect and the Indian aspect, which are influencing a lot your mentality, the way you behave, the way you do things, and the same thing for me as well. And so we see things a bit differently. So I feel like at the end we all experience different things.
Absolutely, yeah. Which makes me really curious. How do you find a sense of belonging as a third culture kid? And I know that's such a broad and heavy question, but that's what I wonder about. That what has helped you, if you are at that spot, but what has helped you feel like, okay, I'm this feeling of home or this feeling of belonging, I'm closer to it.
So for me, it was first accepting myself for who I am and not seeing this fact that I have two cultures as a disadvantage, but more as an asset and my own strength. And it was me accepting and embracing these two cultures and telling myself that both of them belong to me and I feel both of them equally. So that's why I never like to say I'm just fully Bengali, because then I'm not saying half of the stories. I always say I'm Bengali Italian, even though I'm not 50% Italian by blood, but I am by birth, which still has a very huge impact. And then for me, the second part was about being myself around the people that I have with me. Because I think it's, because I never felt like I was comfortable enough with some people around me when I was growing up, because I felt like I was always being judged. And for me, the most important thing has been that I just want to be myself around the people that are saying to be my friends. I don't want to be judged for the things I do. I don't want to be judged for the way I dress. I don't know what, I don't want to be judged for anything at all. And so that has been the most important thing for me, to feel like I belong somewhere. Because I feel like if you want to be accepted by people, you have to make sure that you accept yourself first, but also that you're comfortable enough to be yourself around them. And so that has been the most important thing. Indeed, I also like cut people off from my life if I feel like I cannot be myself around them. And that's why I feel like my closest friends are Italian, because I feel like they're not judging me for the things I'm saying. And I don't have, funny enough, I don't have Bengali friends. I only have one, and that's the friend from UK. I only have one.
Yeah.
I
So
only
it's
have
less
one.
about the place and more about the people that helps create that feeling of home and
It,
belonging.
exactly. And I also realized that all of my friends are actually, most of them are also third culture kids. And I never thought about it. I never thought about it. But when I reflect about it, I'm like, oh, okay, they're born in one place, they live in another place, like they were brought up in another place, and I never paid attention to it. So maybe that's also something that brings us together.
Yeah, that shared experience, a shared collective experience of being a third culture kid. And, you may all have had different like nationalities, but the experience brings you
Yeah,
together.
exactly. The experiences brought us together, and I also love how much variety there is in my circle of friendship. Because back in Italy, I only had Italian friends, but now here I have a little bit of everything. Like I have
Yeah.
a little bit of like Mexican, like Chinese, and Korean. I have a little bit of Costa Rican. So I just love the diversity. I love that. I love that I have that.
Yeah, I love that too. Because yeah, I think you're right that as kids, when we're living under our parents' roofs, it can be difficult to find like a sense of like belonging, and it can be difficult to really be like your authentic self,
Hmm.
which it doesn't usually even develop till like later on. Like in your 20s and 30s, you can say that you have an authentic self, but for third culture kids, there does come a time later on in life when you get to make your own rules, and then you get to make your own communities, and you get to
Yes.
have like your own adopted families.
There you go. Exactly. You said it all.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Um, if there's any third culture kids listening, third culture folks listening, I'd be really curious. We'd be curious to know about, your experience of the sense of finding belonging and peace. Because often in terms of like mental health trends, like what we notice the most with third culture folks is this high functioning sense of depression and anxiety that is often tied to not feeling like I belong anywhere, not feeling like I have a sense of community, not feeling like I can put my roots down anywhere.
Mhm.
Right. So that sense of like community is so, so, so important. Like we are social animals. We need to feel like we belong somewhere and we're part of something.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I feel like, yeah, when you talk about mental health in South Asian community, that's still a taboo subject. No one talks about it. And yeah, if you are going through depression, they think it's just, you're just sad. Let's do something and then you will feel better the next day, even though they don't understand the need of like finding, a therapist, going to therapy sessions, speaking about it to someone, which are very, very important to heal yourself. And that's another thing that like I'm pro like seeing therapists and doing therapy work, but I just feel like this has been such a taboo subject in many brown communities that no one thinks as no one thinks about it as like an actual disease or as an actual something to cure. No one thinks about it, so that's also something that I think people need to talk about it more and more in brown communities and teach our parents about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that can make it really difficult for a third culture person to say, right, that, you know what, I'm not really feeling like I belong anywhere, I need support. So
Mm,
a lot of, those folks don't access support till much later on when they feel like, okay, you know what, I have a good career, I have friends, I have a good job, I got the right degree, but still something feels like it's missing,
yes.
right? And often that missing piece can be this, like a sigh, like, okay, I feel like I can settle myself here in
Mm-hmm.
this group of people or in
Mm-hmm.
this sense of community. So that piece is so, so, so important.
Yes, and I do love this whole concept of communities because, and that's where all my volunteer works come in. It's because I feel a sense of like belonging when I'm doing all these things because I have people around me who are working towards the same goal and people with who I can be honest and have all this like authentic, conversation about things. And I very much enjoy that because I feel like I belong to something and I can just be myself. I think I love communities. Honestly, if you can find a community of people like you, I honestly highly encourage to join them. I think these are a great way to like, socialize and feel yourself. Definitely.
Yeah, I love that because, the truth in what you're saying is that we don't find ourselves in a vacuum.
No.
Like we find ourselves in relationships and in communities and in relation to those communities and those people. So
Yes.
communities are so important for that identity development piece.
Yes. I definitely agree. And especially because I feel like if you join certain communities of people like you can start a conversation of how you feel, and that makes you like more connected to the other person, and maybe you start finding yourself, you go towards that direction that of like, okay, this is who I am, this is who I want to be to the world, this is how I want to show up to the world. And I think that's so important when you're part of a community. I just feel like you are developing yourself to who you're meant to be.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and hopefully, you sharing your passion for communities encourages like some listeners to evaluate if that's something that they want to look into, right? Because yeah, it's important. We want to all feel like a part of something.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's too isolating.
Yes, exactly. I was reading actually today, I don't know where I was reading. I was reading something about us isolation, and how like there was like a research done saying like, oh, isolation is like worse than depression. I don't know, like people feel terrible when they're isolated, and like it's so important that you find like people like you and you feel like you belong to a group. I think that's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I know the piece that you're talking about, but isolation has been found to be the one of the main actually causes for mental health concerns in the last
Yes.
couple of years, like since COVID especially, right? Feeling socially isolated is probably like the number one detriment to mental health and mental well-being, which then we know impacts physical well-being. So that's exactly why it can look so difficult for third culture folks, but finding a sense of community
Yes.
can be very, very healing and very fulfilling.
Yes, that's definitely. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. Yes.
I love that. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you about your experience or me as a third culture kid. And even though there's certainly some differences in our experiences, there's certainly like a lot of similarities as well. And I really hope that those listening can perhaps even, reflect on their own experiences of what it's been like for them and hope that there's something that they can take away from this.
Yes, some, little nuggets. That's how they call it in Canada. Take some nuggets away from this.
Yeah, little nuggets of wisdom. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Folks, if you are interested in checking out Urmi's book, I will certainly have all of her links in the description of the show and the show notes. Feel free to get in touch with her. And thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks everyone for listening in today, and stay tuned for our disclaimer. The guest and the host at Brown People Problems do not offer individualized therapeutic or medical advice, and our conversations should not be interpreted as such. This podcast is not a replacement for therapy. This podcast exists for educational purposes only. Please consider your circumstances and engage with the content mindfully.